Hey, you are going to enjoy this conversation with Richard Olson. Now, Richard has been a pastor since the 1960s, and although he's retired, he's still actively engaged in helping members of his community, members of his network, and people he hasn't met yet know how valuable they are and how much they have to give to their families and their communities. Now, Richard has a book out that we're going to be discussing called The Grandparent Vocation. And this is a really interesting take and a perspective on this role of being a grandparent. You're really going to enjoy listening to our conversation and getting some more of Richard's insights. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind you that my children's book, My Grandpa's Grandpa, is now on sale, and you can receive this book through placing an order on my website, and look for the link up at the top that says bookstore. You can click on that and then go right in and place an order for that children's book. It's also available as a Kindle download, so you can go to Amazon and you can download a copy to your Kindle device if that's what you're using. But either way, I sure would appreciate your support. So enough about me. Let's jump into this conversation with Richard. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm going to enjoy speaking to you about your great book, The Grandparent Vocation. So I really appreciate the time you're spending with us today.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Greg.
Now, I want to ask you about what prompted you to write The Grandparent Vocation. And was there something in your life, an event or something that really prompted this?
Well, I am in retirement and I am able to do things writing that though I'm not able to be out and about doing teaching or participating in community life. And thinking about something that was important to me, I thought about my own grandchildren. It's always been a very important role for Marianne and for me. And I wrote a proposal to my editor, and it just didn't fly. And as we conversed, she said, "Why don't you write about the grandparent as a Christian vocation?" And that automatically clicked with me. And I was able to put together a proposal with her very quickly. And it said something that I had been feeling deep within myself, but I just identified the key thing that holds it all together, that grandparenting is a vocation. And so that's how it came about, Greg.
Oh, well, that's great. And, it's so funny that you mentioned that it was the first proposal went in and that wasn't what was being accepted. But in that conversation, it pivoted over to writing about the grandparent experience as a vocation.
Yeah.
And so it's great when we get those moments of inspiration and collaboration with other people.
I should say.
One of the things I would love for us to do is just briefly talk about the difference between a vocation and occupation. And if you could kind of explain that to us, just for folks that may have heard those terms, but may have gotten them mixed up a bit.
Sure. Okay. An occupation is what you do. Your employment, if you're not employed, what you do to contribute to the welfare of a family or a household or whatever. A vocation includes that, but a vocation is everything you are, who your interests are, who your passions are, what your relationships are. The word vocation is related to the Latin term voco, or call, and vocation in a deeper sense is thought of as one's calling from life, or if you are a theist or believer, a calling from God to use your life, use your relationships, use your interest, use your employment in every way you can to serve a greater whole. vocation can be a very general thing or it can be a very specific thing. And for me, with the birth of my grandchildren, all the joy and ecstasy and excitement I felt about them and all the responsibility I felt for them as I reflected on this, that's my call, or that's at least part of my calling and a very major part of my call as I move into later part of life. So.
Sure. I wanted to ask you too about this because it's something that I've been thinking about along the same lines, is that I think for a lot of grandfathers, and I'm a young grandfather, but sometimes I think we start out with this idea of, here's the occupation of being a grandfather. It's the kids bring you into this.
Yes.
But I think with the right mindset and right approach and a loving heart, that can pivot into accepting that role as being a vocation.
Yes. Yeah. I resisted being a grandpa early on. The announcement of the anticipation of my first grandchild, I should say, came almost at about the same time as my 50th birthday. And up until the time the child was born, Grandpa felt old and I wasn't excited about it at all. But when the child was born, it was a boy, and the first boy in the family since me. And I just melted and totally bonded with him and couldn't wait to see him. We lived 500 miles apart, but couldn't wait for the next time that we could be together. And as I reflected on all this, it's a call not only to care for him and buy him presents and play with him, but a call to care about his world and a call to care about other people's grandchildren and all the things that are associated with that. So calling grew and grew and grew with me, Greg, with the arrival of that child.
Yeah, well, and that's been a similar path as what I've had as well, because I think a number of grandfathers that I've talked to have had that reaction. I mean, reactions are all over the place, but there is that little bit of like, wait a second, grandpas are old and I'm not old. And, this isn't, what are you doing to me? But it's been a real blessing having first the grandson and then now two little granddaughters to go along with it.
Yeah.
Now, I loved your book in that you started out with explaining about grandparents and the biblical perspective of being a grandparent, which I think you admitted in the book, it's a little bit tough because sometimes us old guys, we couldn't outrun the wolves and things very much. And so there weren't a whole lot of grandparents around to be mentioned. So would you mind talking a little bit about what inspired you to look for those references and what were some of those biblical references to being a grandparent?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Greg, since I was asked to approach this and agreed with my editor to approach it as a Christian vocation, I thought I should take a look. And one of the things that the Bible speaks about over and over again is generations. And of course, generation is another name for parent, child, grandparent, great-grandparent. And the Bible lists generations before us and generations after us. And there are promises from God. There's a promise, I will remember you to your 1,000th generation. That's a lot of grandparents. And there's also a lot of guidance to be faithful and tell your generations about what your faith and what your heritage is and who you believe. I found two very brief grandmother stories. One was about Athaliah, who was the daughter of Jezebel and Ahab. And Queen Athaliah, when her son, the king, died, murdered all of her grandchildren so that she could be the queen, except that somebody stole one grandchild away and hid him for 7 years, and then did a coup and named the 7-year-old as the king and guided him, and he served for years and years. And it's a straightforward story in the Bible. To me, it's a a moral and a cautionary tale that you can become a grandparent and not be changed at all. You can be just as selfish and self-centered as they ever were, or it can call you to something different and something new. The other was a one sentence grandparent autobiography, or biography, I should say, where Paul writes, I see to Timothy, I see the faith that resides in you recited in your grandmother Lois and in your mother, and I am sure in you. And that is absolutely the only thing we know about Lois, that she was Timothy's grandmother and that her influence showed on him. And that verse has stuck with me as all the time I was working on this. If there would be one sentence written about me, about my lifetime, and it said that my witness and my faith and my influence had gone to the next generations and it was still being remembered and practiced, I'd settle for that one sentence.
Right. Well, and what a powerful one too, because there's so much with that legacy and
Yes.
within that. And legacy can mean so many different things. It can be, monetary, it can be so many different things, but having a legacy of faith and behavior and a moral code and those sorts of things, I think as we get older, that's the legacy that we all generally want for our grandchildren.
Yeah, I should say grandparents I spoke with really wanted their grandchildren to know how much they were loved and how much they were cared, and hope that they would remember some encounters, some teaching. So legacy is certainly something that comes to the fore in our grandparent years.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I really like to think about is that legacy of sharing that knowledge and how that transitions with us. Because I think as we're younger, we're always thinking about when we hear the inheritance. And sometimes that, especially even in the Bible, it's sometimes referred to as all the possessions that you can leave somebody, that inheritance. But I think as we get older, we start to look at that word a little bit differently. And
Yes.
that inheritance becomes so much more and so much deeper.
It'd be nice to do both, but if you have to choose, why, and don't have all those resources to leave the mark of a character, of a commitment, of a faith, of a remembered practice, that's indeed at the center.
Yes. When you were writing the book and doing the research with the book, what was one of the things that really affected your understanding of either the grandfather and the role of the family in the community, and really that understanding of grandparent as even, the wise figure, the leader of the family?
Yes. I think the thing that came to me clearer and clearer, I knew, but as I was reflecting and writing, it came clearer and clearer, was how fortunate I was to be married to the person I'm married to, and for her to be my partner in grandchild and grandparenting. We're very different people, and she's practical and very hands-on and all, and I'm relational and playful, and I guess that's enough about me. But the way we came together, she was so thoughtful and knew each grandchild's interests, and also well organized, so that things were provided for them: food, home, a place to sleep, everything they needed when they came to see us. And also the one that could provide some structure when we were caring for the grandchildren for a period of time. And we supplemented each other beautifully and provided our grandchildren wonderful experiences. They liked to be with us and spend long periods of time with us because of what the two of us had to offer together, and because of our engagement with the community and the community with us, that we were able to give so much to each of the grandchildren.
So would it be fair to say that the understanding of that role of grandparent and how you even developed that is a little bit of the hub of a wheel in terms of being able to have the grandchildren and the community be supported by you and being able to look to you for example.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
One of the items that really stuck out with me when I read through your book is that it's laid out a little bit differently. And people will be putting links to how you can get a copy of the Grandparent Vocation. But at the end of the chapters, you've laid out discussion questions. And this is a little bit different from some of the other grandparenting books that I've read. Why did you decide to include the discussion questions into the book?
Two reasons, Greg. In preparing the book, I did about 25 formal interviews with grandparents. And to do that, I had created a series of questions that basically follow the chapters and topics of the book. And when I would thank persons for doing this interview with me, they were each an hour and a half long. Over and over again, they said to me, "Oh, that interview was fun because your questions helped me remember things I'd forgotten. And it was great to revisit my memories of my grandchildren and the experiences we had and what we have because of those experiences." And so I wanted to reproduce that experience for people reading the book, that as they read a chapter, they not only hear about my experience and these other grandparents, but I would raise some questions with them that would help them to explore and enjoy and celebrate their own grandparenting. And I guess this leads to a related person that I would hope that maybe some book groups might pick up this book and read it through together. And the questions would help them not only think about the book, but think about themselves and how it applied to their life and what they remember, what they treasure, what they revisit out of their grandparenting. So.
And that was one thing too that I wanted to just remind folks, and you'll see it when you order your copy of the book, is that it lends itself really, really nicely to any kind of a book club, a Sunday school discussion, anything along those lines. But even if you don't get attached to a group to go through the book together, the questions at the end of the chapters really allow you to sit and ponder and think about your relationship and how you're being a grandparent and what are some of the things you might want to adjust. And, and that's not saying, hey, you're doing this thing wrong. It's more of a case of like through the interviews and through some of the writings and the experiences being shared, I can always learn a few things. I can always go, oh, I should add this next time I'm seeing the grandchildren, or this is a different approach to how I'm fulfilling that role in the vocation of being a grandparent. What was one of the biggest moments in personal revelation about being a grandfather that you realized?
I think one of the moments of revelation was the birth of my great-grandchildren in the last 3.5 years. Four great-grandchildren, all little boys, have been born. And to be with family, welcoming and playing with these new great-grandsons, 2 of them are a little over 3 and 2 of them are a little over 1, I come to realize what I could no longer do that I did with my younger grandchildren, and how much I treasured playing with them, taking them to parks and zoos and swimming pools and museums, and taking them out for a meal or a treat, or going and buying a present for them. And most of those activities I cannot do. And when we gather as a large family, Marianne and I are kind of on the sideline, and the younger, more active grandparents and parents are all playing with the children. But when the children come and spend a few moments with us, we treasure them a great deal and realize that even though we can't give all those things we once did, we are a loving, caring presence for them, and we are part of that heritage. We wrote a book of stories of our childhood so that we probably won't be around when they grow to adolescence and all, but they will know who we were. that we were there to celebrate their arrival, and we'll love them wherever we are after that time.
Have you been able to help the adult children understand their role about being a grandparent, or give them advice? And that's not to say, hey, this is how you do it and you have to do it this way, but that little bit of time to go, hey, you need to really savor this experience, or you need to document this.
Very interesting. One of my daughters retired at age 62 from a very demanding job. She was a public health employee during the pandemic, and retired at 62. And for the first year after her retirement, she offered to care for her newborn, few-month-old grandson, so that his mother could continue her nursing career. And it's been fun to watch my daughter and son-in-law be grandparents to this little boy who's now a little over 1. And I don't need to say a thing to them, because they have discovered what so many other grandparents did, what I did, that I was pretty preoccupied as a parent, and I had my job to do, and I had many responsibilities, so that to take time and just savor them and just be with them didn't happen as often. But when the grandchildren came around, I said, whenever they are here, I am all theirs and they are all mine. And to see my daughter do the same thing, she was a working mother, and I hired lots of daycare and preschool and all. But to give her time totally, and to relax and enjoy and to experience all the discoveries of the first year of this child's life, I haven't had to say a thing. They have done it just beautifully.
And I'm sure there's a lot of example to be pulled from with how you did things. But I do find it's interesting, because I do talk with other grandfathers and grandmothers a little bit about how when we're parents, we're so down into the day-to-day about job and the mortgage and where should we move and what's going on with the kids, that sometimes we really don't have the opportunity to appreciate and just be in the moment with those kids. But that's a little bit of a reward when you become a grandparent.
Yeah. I will say that each of my children and grandchildren get a copy of the book for one of their Christmas presents.
Oh, good. And is there anything that you came across when writing this book that was a bit of a surprise for you?
I think the awareness, let me start this over. The broadness of the grandparent calling just grew on me as I thought about all of the implications of being a grandpa. And one is to care for other people's grandchildren through volunteerism, through caring for children, through offering what we can. And I came across the stories and the experience, and wrote a chapter about grandparents that are called to be parents to their children because of some crisis or tragedy in their child's family. And that is a deep and urgent calling on some who need the support of all the rest of us grandparents, because it's a very demanding situation and not given nearly the attention and support is needed. I also sense the calling about my grandchild's world. I tell the story that I wasn't recycling very well, and my daughter took me to task and said, that's your grandchildren's world that you're messing up. Get to it and recycle and care for the environment more. And I worry about the world my grandchildren and great-grandchildren will live in, and want to do everything, not only what I myself can do to provide a safer world for them, but to educate them into caring for that world that they will be living in. So those were some of the surprises, how broad and wide the grandparent calling goes.
It's been interesting to go through all that within the book. So Dick, I've had you on for a little bit. Is there anything that you would like to bring up about the book that maybe I haven't asked you or that we haven't touched on?
I think this has been a good overview, Greg. I'm okay.
Okay, well, good. And I think there's a couple of items in the book that I'd love to have you come back on so we could go a little bit deeper with. But we'll connect on that and get set up because this is such a valuable book. And folks, we'll put the links to how you can order the book into the show notes. And again, the name of the book is The Grandparent Vocation. So you can look that up, but we'll have links and make everything super easy to get the book and connect with Dick as well in the show notes on the website. Dick, I'm going to go ahead and we'll wrap this conversation up, but I just wanted to thank you again for being on the podcast and talking about this important book that I hope really people go out there, find it, and take it to heart because it is such a well-written book and deeply impactful. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah, that's so gracious of you, Greg. Thanks so much.
I had a great time talking with Richard, and I really enjoyed his perspective of this role of grandparent being a calling, a vocation, not just something that's thrust upon us and something that we have to do, but something that if we choose, we can accept this calling and we can really magnify our role as a grandfather and as a grandmother. I really did appreciate some of the in-depth conversation. It really laid the groundwork for me to invite Richard to come back on an episode that will be upcoming shortly to really dive in and talk about how grandparents can share their faith and values with their grandchildren without, beating them up over the head with it and not forcing it on them, but actually just inviting them to walk along and share their values and their faith with them. So keep an eye out for that upcoming conversation with Richard. I really appreciate you listening to this podcast, and please be sure to share it with somebody that would enjoy this conversation as well. That's the best way we can grow this audience and really make sure that grandparents and grandfathers in particular know how valuable you are to the lives of your children and grandchildren. So until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.